Alex Bennett had spent 15 years learning how systems break. Not just physical security, cameras, locks, perimeter defenses, but the human systems that surrounded them. How guards developed patterns, how protocols created vulnerabilities, how every security apparatus, no matter how sophisticated, ultimately depended on fallible people making predictable choices. He'd built a career on finding those breaking points before criminals could exploit them. Corporate headquarters, government facilities, high-net-worth residences. Alex would walk through a client's security infrastructure and see not what was there, but what was missing. The camera angle that left a blind spot. The shift change that created a 30-second window. The emergency protocol that could be triggered to override standard procedures. His expertise had made him wealthy. It had also made him dangerous to the wrong people. The trial had been efficient in its injustice. Prosecutors claimed Alex had sold classified security protocols to a foreign intelligence service. Detailed blueprints of federal facilities he'd consulted on. The evidence was damning. Encrypted files on his personal computer, wire transfers to offshore accounts, testimony from a DOJ informant who'd supposedly witnessed the exchange. Alex's lawyer had fought hard, but fighting evidence that thorough required more than legal skill. It required someone to believe that a man with his expertise could be framed so completely. The jury hadn't believed it. 8 years in federal custody, reduced to state prison after appeal complications that Alex's lawyer had attributed to procedural complexities. What the lawyer hadn't known, what Alex himself hadn't known until much later, was that the evidence hadn't been planted by foreign operatives or corporate competitors. It had been meticulously constructed by the two people he'd trusted most in the world. Who were these people, and why had they gone to such lengths to set up this trap? Ironwood State Correctional Facility sat in the high plains of eastern Montana, a medium security complex that housed 900 inmates in conditions that made mockery of the word correctional. The facility was understaffed, undermaintained, and operated by guards who'd long since learned that cruelty was easier than competence. Alex arrived on a Thursday morning, processed through intake with mechanical efficiency. They catalogued his possessions, which included his glasses, miraculously allowed despite being a potential weapon, and assigned him to D Block, a housing unit that older inmates referred to as the grinder, for reasons Alex suspected he'd learn soon enough. His cellmate was a 23-year-old kid named Tommy, inside on drug charges, who spent his first interaction with Alex explaining the facility's hierarchy with the nervous energy of someone trying to be helpful while also establishing he wasn't a threat. "The big dogs run everything through connections," Tommy said, unpacking his words quickly. "But the real power? That's Reaper. Life sentence, organized crime. He doesn't run a gang exactly, but he's got reach. Outside and inside. You don't cross Reaper. You don't even look at Reaper funny." Alex absorbed the information the way he absorbed every security briefing, cataloging details, identifying patterns, building mental maps. He'd spent his first 6 hours at Ironwood observing the guard rotations, the camera positions, the choke points where inmates congregated, the blind spots created by architectural oversight. It wasn't intentional. Years of experience made him do all this instinctively. His mind automatically logged every pattern, structural mechanism, margin of error, and blind spot one by one. Even though Alex knew he would be here for another 8 years, he couldn't stop himself from analyzing how the system worked and where it failed. He was 3 days into his sentence when Reaper found him. It happened in the yard during afternoon recreation. Alex had been walking the perimeter, a habit from his professional life, always checking sight lines and access points, when a man the size of a defensive lineman materialized in his path. Reaper was aptly named. He stood 6'4", 240 of muscle and scar tissue, with a face that suggested he'd survived situations that should have killed him. His arms were sleeved in prison tattoos, the quality good enough to indicate they'd been done before incarceration. His eyes were flat, assessing, the kind of gaze that had looked at death and found it familiar. Alex Bennett. Reaper's voice was surprisingly measured, lacking the theatrical menace some inmates affected. Security consultant. 15 years in the private sector. Convicted of selling classified information. 8-year sentence. First week in Gen Pop. Alex kept his expression neutral, though his pulse had accelerated. This wasn't casual interest. This was someone who'd done homework. "You're well informed," Alex said carefully. "I make it my business to know who's worth knowing." Reaper gestured with his head, and Alex found himself walking alongside the larger man, moving toward a corner of the yard where the camera coverage was notably poor. Alex had identified it on day 2. "You've got a particular skill set, one that's valuable in certain contexts. I'm not interested in whatever you're selling." Reaper's laugh was short, humorless. "You think I'm recruiting you for some bullshit prison hustle? Nah, I've got a different proposition. See, I received an interesting offer this week. Someone on the outside paid good money, serious money, for me to kill you." Alex stopped walking. Every security instinct he'd developed over 15 years was screaming, but he forced himself to maintain composure. Showing fear was showing weakness, and weakness was blood in the water. "Who?" Alex asked, his voice steady despite his racing thoughts. "That's the interesting part. My contact wouldn't say. Very careful about anonymity. But the money's real, and the instructions were specific. Make it look like standard prison violence. No rush, no mess. Just eventually, you stop breathing." "So why are you telling me this?" Reaper studied him with those flat, calculating eyes. "Because I did some checking. Your background, your skills. And I realized something. You know how to break security systems, high-level systems, the kind of systems that might, say, exist in a state correctional facility." Understanding hit Alex like cold water. "You want me to help you escape?" "I want us to help each other escape," Reaper corrected. "I've got the muscle, the connections, the willingness to do what needs doing. But I don't have the technical knowledge. Every plan I've considered hits the same walls. Cameras, locks, timing, guard rotations. That's your expertise. And if I refuse, then I take the money and do the job. Maybe not today, maybe not this month, but 8 years is a long time, Bennett. Eventually, you'll slip. Eventually, I'll have my opportunity." Reaper's expression didn't change, but his tone carried absolute certainty. "That's not a threat. It's just reality. I'm a man who completes contracts. Always have been." Alex's mind was racing through variables. The immediate threat, the offer on the table, the brutal calculus of survival versus ethics. 3 days ago, he'd been a professional security consultant with a code of conduct. Now he was an inmate being offered a choice between cooperation and eventual murder. But beneath the immediate crisis, another thought crystallized. Someone wanted him dead. Someone had paid serious money to ensure he'd never leave prison alive. And Alex had no idea who. "I need something first," Alex said. "Before I agree to anything, I need to find out who paid you to kill me." Reaper considered this. "Why?" "Because if I'm going to risk my life escaping with you, I need to know what I'm running from. Who wants me dead enough to hire you? That information might be critical to survival on the outside." It was partially true, but more importantly, Alex needed to understand the threat's origins. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to put him in prison. Now they wanted to ensure he never got out. That suggested something bigger than a simple frame job. "I can find out," Reaper said after a moment. "My outside contact owes me favors. Might take a few days, but yeah, I can get a name. Then we have a deal. You get me that information, and I'll plan our way out of here." Reaper extended his hand. Massive, scarred, belonging to a man who'd killed enough people to earn a life sentence. Alex shook it, feeling the calloused strength, understanding that he'd just made a pact with exactly the kind of person he'd spent his career protecting clients from. "Welcome to the team, Bennett," Reaper said. "Don't make me regret keeping you breathing." The next 3 days, Alex waited with forced patience, while Reaper worked his outside connections. During that time, Alex observed Ironwood's security infrastructure with renewed purpose. No longer academic interest, but tactical necessity. In short, his own life depended on it. Maybe he could evade the Reaper. But would the people who had hired the Reaper stop? Of course they wouldn't. For now, the only thing he could do was play the game by its rules. He noted that cameras in D Block had blind spots near the stairwell access. That guard shifts changed at 6 a.m. and 2 p.m. with a 15-minute overlap that created chaos in communication. That the facility's emergency lockdown protocol, required to be posted for fire code compliance, could be triggered by pulling alarms in 3 locations simultaneously. He cataloged personnel patterns. Guard Morrison was lazy, often skipping sections of his rounds. Officer Chen was meticulous but predictable, following the same patrol route to the minute. The evening supervisor, Davis, spent more time on his phone than monitoring security feeds. Every observation went into Alex's mental blueprint of the facility. He couldn't write anything down, too risky if discovered, but his memory for spatial details and security systems was near photographic. 15 years of professional practice had trained him to build complete facility models in his head. On the 4th day, Reaper found him in the cafeteria during lunch. The big man's face was unreadable, but something in his posture suggested the news wasn't good. "Got your answer," Reaper said quietly, sliding onto the bench across from Alex. "Took some pressure, but my contact came through. The money for the hit came from 2 sources. Paid jointly." "Who?" Alex felt his chest tighten with anticipation. "Jessica Bennett and Mark Bennett." Reaper watched Alex carefully. "Mean anything to you?" The cafeteria noise faded to white static. Alex's vision narrowed to a tunnel, his breath catching in his throat like he'd been gut-punched. Jessica, his wife, and Mark, his younger brother. "You good?" Reaper's voice seemed to come from very far away. Alex forced himself to breathe, to think, to process what he'd just learned with the same analytical precision he'd apply to any security problem. Emotion was a vulnerability. Facts were tools. Jessica and Mark. Together they'd framed him. The evidence on his computer had required physical access he'd given to both of them. The wire transfers could have been arranged with banking access Jessica had. The DOJ informant's testimony might have been someone Mark knew through his own consulting business. And now they'd paid to have him killed. "Family?" Reaper asked, reading Alex's expression. "My wife," Alex said, his voice hollow. "And my brother." Reaper was quiet for a moment. "That's cold. Even by my standards, that's fucking cold." "How much?" Alex heard himself ask. "How much did they pay you?" 50,000, 25 each. Reaper's tone was matter of fact. Split payment suggests they're working together, probably afraid to trust just one person with that kind of transaction. Working together. Alex's mind filled in the implications automatically. Jessica and Mark hadn't just framed him. They were together. had been together, probably for longer than Alex wanted to calculate. They'd systematically destroyed his life to be together, and now they were paying to ensure he'd never be able to expose them. "You still want to help me escape?" Reaper asked. "Because I'll be honest, Bennett, finding out your family sold you out, that usually breaks people, and I need you sharp, not shattered." Alex looked up, meeting Reaper's flat gaze. Something had shifted inside him. The shock was crystallizing into something colder, harder, more focused. "I'll get us out," Alex said quietly. "And when I do, I'm going to make sure Jessica and Mark understand exactly what happens when you betray someone who understands how systems break." Reaper smiled, a thin, humorless expression. "Now, that's the kind of motivation I can work with. When do we start?" "Now," Alex said. "I need to know everything about your connections. Who you've got on the outside. What resources we can access. What violence you're willing to commit if necessary. All of it. Whatever it takes." "Good." Alex's mind was already working, processing variables, building plans. Because this isn't just about escaping anymore. This is about getting out clean enough that when we're free, I can personally deliver consequences. Over the following days, Alex and Reaper formed an unlikely partnership. They spoke in fragments during yard time, in quiet corners during meals, in moments when surveillance was lax. Alex learned that Reaper's life sentence came from organizing a series of armored car robberies that had resulted in 3 deaths. Violence. Reaper described with the same emotional detachment he'd describe changing a tire. "I'm not saying I'm proud of it," Reaper said during one conversation. "But I'm not going to pretend I lose sleep either. People die. That's life. The question is whether you die in here, serving time for shit you didn't do, or whether you live free and make the people who put you here pay for it." Alex had no response to that. His entire career had been built on protecting assets, preventing breaches, maintaining lawful security. Now he was planning a prison escape with a killer, plotting revenge against his wife and brother. Who he was becoming would have horrified the man he'd been 4 weeks ago. But that man had been a fool who'd trusted the wrong people. By the end of the first week, Alex had a preliminary framework. Ironwood's security had 17 major vulnerabilities he could exploit, but only 3 offered realistic escape routes. The most promising involved the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the facility, a legacy of the prison's original 1970s construction that had been retrofitted poorly as the facility expanded. "We'll need access to the basement level," Alex explained during a yard conversation, speaking quietly while appearing to discuss nothing important. "The tunnels connect to the waste management system. There's an access point that exits near the facility perimeter. If we can reach it during a controlled chaos event, something that draws guard attention elsewhere, we'd have approximately 8 minutes to breach the perimeter before response teams mobilize." "What kind of chaos?" "Fire alarm in the medical wing. Small electrical fire, easy to start with the right materials. Triggers automatic lockdown protocols, but also requires guards to verify the emergency." "That's our window." Reaper nodded slowly. "Materials?" "I can source them from the workshop. I've been watching the inventory management. It's sloppy. No one will notice missing components if taken gradually." "Timeline?" 3 weeks to gather materials and finalize the route. Week 4, we execute. It was ambitious. Reckless, even. But Alex had spent his career understanding how security systems functioned under pressure. He knew that the same protocols designed to prevent escapes could be exploited during emergencies when human judgment became compromised. The planning consumed him. It gave him purpose beyond the hollow anger of betrayal. Every day, he gathered intelligence, memorized guard schedules, identified backup plans for when, not if, something went wrong. And at night, lying in his bunk while Tommy snored on the rack below, Alex thought about Jessica and Mark, about how they'd looked him in the eye and lied, about how they'd systematically destroyed his life while he'd trusted them completely. He would get out. He would expose them. And they would learn that betraying someone who specialized in breaking systems was a mistake they would regret for whatever remained of their comfortable lives. For now, he had to focus on escaping. If his plans progressed flawlessly and he managed to get away, he would unleash all his anger on them. First, though, he had to survive long enough to escape. And Reaper, despite being his only ally, was still the man who'd been paid to kill him. Alex hadn't forgotten that. Not for a moment. The second week, Alex began acquiring components. It required patience and misdirection, skills he'd refined during security assessments where revealing his methods would compromise the test. A length of wire from the electrical workshop, chemical accelerants from the maintenance supply closet, matches taken 3 at a time from the commissary. Tommy, bless him, never asked questions about the items Alex carefully concealed in their cell. The kid had learned early that ignorance was survival. He knew very well what kind of problems curiosity and asking too many questions could bring here. Alex stored everything in a hollowed section behind his bunk's metal frame, a space he'd identified during his first security assessment of the cell. The hiding spot wouldn't survive a dedicated search, but routine inspections missed it consistently. He mapped the maintenance tunnels through conversations with inmates who'd worked basement detail. Old Joe, a lifer who'd spent years in facilities maintenance, provided crucial details about the tunnel system's layout during what appeared to be casual conversations about prison history. Original construction was 1973, Joe had explained during a yard talk. They built the tunnels for utilities, but half of them don't connect to nothing anymore. Sealed off during the '89 renovation. Except the seals are shit. I've seen rats the size of cats coming up from down there. Which sections are still accessible? Alex had asked, framing it as curious interest. East Wing tunnels connect to the old waistline. Runs right under the perimeter. They were supposed to cap it off, but you know how state budgets are. Probably still opens up outside the fence. Alex had filed away every detail. The East Wing, the waistline, the uncapped exit. Each piece of information refined his mental blueprint. By week 3, he had a complete plan. Not just the escape route, but every contingency. What they'd do if guards discovered them early. How they'd bypass the tunnel's locked access door. What route they'd take once outside the perimeter. Reaper had arranged for a vehicle to be positioned 2 miles northeast of the facility, accessible via Forest Service roads that rarely saw patrols. "My guy's solid," Reaper assured him during a planning session disguised as a weights conversation. "He'll have the car there Thursday evening, keys under the wheel well. We hit the fence by 8 p.m. We're in that vehicle by 8:30. And then we disappear. I've got resources, places we can lay low while things cool down. After that?" Reaper's expression was unreadable. "After that, we go our separate ways. You do what you need to do with your family situation. I do what I need to do." Alex nodded, but doubt had been growing in his mind like a slow infection. Reaper was pragmatic, efficient, ruthless, all qualities that made him a valuable partner. But those same qualities made him dangerous once his usefulness expired. Would Reaper really let Alex walk away? Or would eliminating the only witness to their escape seem like the logical move? Alex began building insurance into his plan. Small modifications Reaper wouldn't notice until it was too late. The maintenance tunnel had 3 security doors between the basement and the exit point. Alex's plan involved bypassing all three using master key codes he'd extracted from careless guards. But Alex had started memorizing which codes opened which doors, and he'd realized that the third door, the one nearest the exit, could be remotely locked from a panel in the tunnel itself, a safety feature designed to contain chemical spills or fire. If Alex reached that panel first, he could seal the door behind him. Trap Reaper in the tunnel while Alex escaped alone. It was cold, pragmatic. The kind of calculation Alex would have found unconscionable 4 weeks ago, but betrayal had taught him that survival required hard choices. Reaper was useful now, but beyond these walls, he was a killer who knew too much about Alex's plans and capabilities. Better to end the partnership on Alex's terms. Thursday of week 3 arrived with tense anticipation. Alex had assembled the incendiary device, crude but effective, and concealed it in a maintenance cart he'd positioned near the medical wing earlier that day. At 7 p.m. during the evening recreation period, Alex would trigger the fire alarm. The chaos would cover their movement to the basement access. But at noon, during lunch, everything changed. Guard Morrison appeared at Alex's table, his expression carrying the bored authority of someone delivering routine information. "Bennett, Warden wants to see you. Now." Alex's pulse spiked, but he kept his face neutral. Beside him, Reaper's eyes narrowed fractionally, a warning or perhaps a question about whether Alex had been compromised. "Any idea why?" Alex asked calmly. "Above my pay grade. Move." The walk to the administrative wing felt endless. Alex's mind raced through possibilities. Had someone discovered the materials he'd gathered? Had a guard noticed him studying security patterns? Had Jessica and Mark sent another message through official channels? The warden's office was institutional beige, decorated with commendations that probably meant nothing to the man behind the desk. Warden Phillips was 60-something, worn down by decades of managing human misery on a government budget. He studied Alex with the tired assessment of someone who'd seen every con and scam. "Mr. Bennett," Phillips said, gesturing to a chair. "Sit." Alex sat, forcing himself to appear confused but cooperative. "You've been here almost 4 weeks," Phillips continued. "Clean record so far. No incidents. Your intake assessment flagged you as low risk, which frankly surprised me given your charges. Corporate espionage isn't our usual population." "I didn't commit the crimes I was convicted of," Alex said. A true statement, though he doubted it would matter. "They all say that." Phillips pulled out a folder. "I'm not here to retry your case. I'm here because we've had some concerning intelligence. We've been informed that there may be a threat against you. Someone on the outside has allegedly placed a contract." Alex felt ice in his stomach. How did the warden know? Had Reaper's contact been compromised? "I don't know anything about that," Alex said carefully. "I'm sure you don't. But we take these things seriously. For your safety, we're moving you to protective custody, pending investigation." Protective custody? That would isolate him from Reaper, destroy their escape plan. "Warden, I don't think that's necessary." "It's not a request, Bennett. You'll be transferred to PC this afternoon. If the threat assessment clears, you can return to general population. Until then, you're in isolation for your own good." Alex was escorted back to D Block to collect his belongings. Reaper caught his eye across the day room, and Alex gave the briefest shake of his head. A signal they'd established meaning compromised, abort. But aborting wasn't an option. If Alex went into protective custody, the escape window would close. Reaper might assume Alex had talked, broken their partnership, and the hit contract would remain active. Eventually, somewhere, Jessica and Mark's money would find its target. Alex, had one chance, one narrow window before the transfer happened. In his cell, packing his minimal possessions, Alex made his decision. Tommy was at recreation. The cell block was understaffed. Afternoon shift change meant minimal supervision. And the incendiary device was already positioned in the medical wing maintenance cart. Alex retrieved a small lighter from his concealed stash, caught Reaper's attention through the cell bars, made a quick series of hand signals they'd practiced. Now. Emergency protocol. Medical wing. Reaper's eyes widened fractionally. Then he nodded. No hesitation. No questions. Alex moved quickly to the medical wing, heart hammering. He'd planned this for Thursday evening with full darkness as cover. Doing it now, in afternoon light with guards still processing shift change, increased the risk exponentially. But increased risk beat no chance at all. He reached the maintenance cart, pulled the device, set the timer for 2 minutes, placed it behind chemical storage where the fire would look like an accident, then walked calmly back toward D block as alarms began shrieking. The response was immediate and chaotic. Guards rushed toward medical. Inmates were ordered to cells. Emergency protocols activated exactly as Alex had predicted, creating the confusion he needed. Reaper met him at the basement access door, a service entrance that should have been locked, but which Alex had sabotaged days earlier. They descended into darkness, using a flashlight Reaper had acquired from sources Alex didn't question. The tunnels were exactly as described. Concrete, damp, lined with pipes that dripped condensation. The air smelled of mold and chemicals. They moved quickly, following Alex's memorized route. First security door. Alex input the bypass code. The lock clicked open. Second door. Another code. Another successful bypass. Behind them, Alex could hear the muffled chaos of the facility in emergency lockdown. They had maybe 6 minutes before response teams organized a systematic search. Third door appeared ahead, the final barrier before the exit tunnel. "Almost there," Reaper said, his voice tight with adrenaline. Alex reached the control panel mounted beside the door. Input the final code. The door's magnetic lock disengaged with a heavy clunk. This was the moment. The decision point Alex had been planning since the partnership began. He stepped through the doorway. Reaper followed, and Alex spun, driving his elbow into Reaper's jaw with every ounce of strength his fit frame could generate. The big man staggered, more from surprise than damage, but Alex was already moving, hitting the emergency seal button on the interior panel. The door slammed shut with hydraulic force, magnetic locks engaging with a definitive thunk. Through the small window, Alex saw Reaper's face transform from shock to rage. The man threw himself at the door, but it was 3-inch steel designed to contain chemical fires. His fists made hollow thuds that wouldn't breach anything. "Bennett!" Reaper's voice was muffled, but venomous. "You fucking coward!" Alex met his eyes through the window. "You would have done the same. We both know it. I gave you your life. No. You gave me a choice between death and usefulness. I chose a third option." Alex's voice was cold, analytical. "You're a killer, Reaper. Eventually, you'd have decided I was a liability. This way, I control the outcome. They'll find me in here. They'll add years to my sentence. For nothing. You'll survive. You always do. But you won't be following me." Alex turned away from Reaper's rage-distorted face and moved down the exit tunnel. His chest was tight with adrenaline and something that might have been guilt, but he pushed it down. This was survival. This was the pragmatic choice. This was what Jessica and Mark had taught him about loyalty and trust. The exit emerged near the perimeter fence, concealed by overgrown vegetation. Alex crawled out into Montana evening air that tasted like freedom and ash. In the distance, Smoke rose from Ironwood's medical wing. Sirens wailed. Chaos continued. He ran northeast through scrub forest, using skills from the wilderness survival training he'd taken years ago for a client assessment. 2 miles. 40 minutes of hard running in fading light. The vehicle was where Reaper had promised, a nondescript sedan with keys under the wheel well. Alex started it, pulled onto the Forest Service road, and drove away from 8 years of confinement. He was free, alone, wanted by every law enforcement agency in Montana. And he had 2 names burning in his mind like brands: Jessica Bennett and Mark Bennett. They'd destroyed his life, stolen his freedom, and paid to have him killed. They thought they'd gotten away with it, thought they were safe while he rotted in prison or died in a cell. They were wrong. Alex had spent 15 years learning how to break security systems. Now he'd apply that expertise to breaking the people who'd betrayed him. Not with violence, that was Reaper's method. Alex would use what he did best: finding vulnerabilities, exploiting weaknesses, and dismantling carefully constructed facades until nothing remained. Jessica and Mark had built their new life on his destruction. Alex would burn it down with the same methodical precision he'd used to escape Ironwood. He drove through the night, heading south toward a future that existed only as a promise of consequences. The man who'd walked into that prison 4 weeks ago had believed in systems, in trust, in the fundamental decency of people he loved. That man was gone. What emerged was something colder, more dangerous. A security expert who understood that the same skills protecting assets could destroy lives. The person who once sealed every system, every blind spot, every vulnerability, was now coming to tear them down one by one. He was coming to destroy the entire system and ruin them as much as possible. Jessica and Mark would wait in cold dread, never knowing when or where the danger they had created with their own hands would finally confront them.